Alright, level 1 runs in From Software games, a challenge in which you have low health and stamina and no benefit of scaling. But on top of that, a limited choice of weapons. However, in the later installments, you gain the ability to increase your attributes passively without leveling up by equipping stat boosting gear. However, back in Dark Souls 1, no such gear existed yet. In fact, the majority of SL1 runs in Dark Souls 1 are focused around only a handful of weapons, which have proven to be ideal at low level. The giant blacksmith hammer and the reinforced club primarily. Or possibly the jagged ghost blade for more efficient bleed damage. Or if you don't limit yourself to melee attacks, pyromancy spells neither require nor specifically benefit from any stat to begin with. So therefore level 1 runs that focus on other weapons are relatively rare. I myself have done an SL1 Cestus run on max NG quite a long time ago by now. However, that does raise a question. How much variety is there to how you can approach an SL1 run in the first Dark Souls game? In other words, what would it be like to go through the game at SL1 if you have to use a different weapon for each individual boss encounter? Is it even possible to finish the game, let alone defeat every single boss in the game, given the lack of stat boosting gear? Now, you might immediately think about using individual pyromancies for different fights, or even using small shields as weapons. The former might be somewhat problematic because of limited casts, and the latter might be inefficient due to low damage output, but at least you would have a lot of options to choose from. But that's kinda lame. So how about we make it more interesting and add the following restriction. Only one boss can be defeated with a single offensive pyromancy, only one boss can be defeated by attacking with a shield, and only one boss can be defeated with a weapon that you don't meet the stat requirements for, since that won't actually prevent you from attacking with it. And of course, infusions do not count as separate weapons, and summons are not allowed. But of course, buffs like Power Within and Magic Weapon are on the table at any point, as those merely add damage to whatever weapon you are currently wielding. So, with those restrictions in mind, how far can you progress in the game at Soul Level 1 until you literally run out of ways to inflict any damage at all? Well, that sure as hell sounds like a massive pain in the arsenal, but fortunately we can actually make our way past the first boss of the run without using any weapon at all. And although using your bare fist is a lengthy process, in this case it's not actually a difficult one, given that the Asylum Demon has only about 3 moves or so, none of which can reach directly behind him. The most likely thing to get you hit is, technically nothing, because the hitbox of the overhead slam attack kind of puts the ass into Asylum. Now, it evidently creates an invisible shockwave with a lingering hitbox. Regardless, not to worry, we can deal with that. We'll just need to grab the bull by the horns, because the same thing applies to the Taurus Demon's axe. However, it's the passive hitboxes on his feet that can truly be qualified as a massive load of bull. However, none of that matters, as we don't need to get up close and personal to begin with, because consumables don't have any stat requirements at all, and in this game they don't even benefit from any scaling. So throwables will be great for early game bosses. In fact, I could still make use of the latter despite the lack of a plunging attack. Well, that is, the lack of plunging attack on my end. Because Taurus apparently was like, if I'm going down, I'm going down epically. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, if you had lured the Taurus Demon off the side of the bridge, then you could have done a pacifist kill, and that way you could have saved this weapon for another boss, if there's a fear of running out of options. So it would be really painful if we run out of weapon options at the final fight against Gwyn. But hey, we only just got started, there's no reason to worry yet. So let's get some helpful equipment first, especially the weaponsmith box, and obviously one of 2 really helpful rings on SL1 will be the Fab Ring. Oh, and of course you will get a rare as hell drop exactly in a run when you have no use for it. I mean, dancing around like a dumbass certainly requires no skill, but dying from laughter is unfortunately not a Lord Dranian execution method. But what will help us with efficient elimination is, as you would have guessed, the Red Tearstone Ring. Although that will not boost the damage of consumables. And it might be best to get the weaker ones out of the way first. So let's see if I can make the gargoyles gargle on some hot steamy exploding balls. As in using firebombs. And for an early game fight like this, they take quite a chunk of health from a mere regular firebomb. I mean, it's not exactly through the roof, but certainly on top of it. Although I wasted way too much time trying to hit the tail, even though that wasn't necessary to begin with. And if you waste time, when both are chasing you around, with their fire not restricted to a brittle and breakable shell, then you will need to keep a cool head regardless, otherwise you will end up dropping a quite different variety of F-bombs. So, after surviving such a critical and consequential combustion compound containing ceramic cataclysm, we earned the right to ring the first bell of awakening, while enduring the dissatisfaction that the C in ceramic is pronounced with an S sound, because that messed up my alliteration thing. But the main issue here is that consumables will only get you so far. However, that doesn't mean that we are completely restricted to melee weapons either. Therefore, I went down into Lower Undeadburg to free Griggs, because there are 3 spells that you can use at level 1. Magic Shield, which is not relevant at all in this run. Magic Weapon, which is a helpful buff. But there is in fact also one offensive spell that we can use, namely the basic version of Soul Arrow. Although I can't say I've ever seen anyone actually use it as one, even though my expectation was that it would prove to be overkill against Capra Demon. And my expectations were very wrong. Because despite it not being a literal arrow, I still felt a quiver on my back the moment I realized that not only could I hardly kill the dogs with any efficiency, but the lengthy startup animation made it even less viable due to my lack of poise. So yes, in this game, even on level 1 poise can be relevant. But even when you do manage to hit something with your soul arrows, the damage is so low that you can barely afford to waste any of the 30 that you have, even though that sounds like a massive amount. No, quite the contrary, I literally ran out of ammunition. And I cannot improve the damage by upgrading, and well, obviously not by leveling up, being stuck at level 1. However, not to worry, because the Red Tearstone ring doesn't merely boost physical damage after all. So after the dogs were gone, the efficiency of the Red Tearstone would once again ring true. Ironically, being that low on health can be a literal lifesaver. But I must say, I certainly overestimated the power of Soul Arrow, so I'm glad I chose to use it on an early game boss. But speaking of the later game bosses, Titanite chunks are quite limited, so for the most part we'll have to make do with only a plus 10 weapon, for which we need the large amber, and I thought to be quick and nimble and clever trying to sneak it out from under the enemy's noses, but I think I kinda butchered it. Well, I still got it at least. And fortunately I only need 1 large shard to modify my next weapon, which will be the battle axe, since I can do the rest myself with a weaponsmith box. And therefore I went down into Blighttown, and then even further down into the Great Hollow first, to pick up all the chunks for quite a bit later into the game, as I mentioned before, as we'll mostly have to make do with plus 10 weapons. Although we will need to farm the leeches for that, and yeah, leeches suck. Now they do drop green Titanite 5 at a time, so at least that is no problem, but for this weapon we need regular large Titanite shards. But I ended up choosing to take on Quelaag with only a plus 8 weapon instead. But you know, that should be sufficient anyway. What the hell? Crapalicious, I'm in human form. Oh, here she comes. She's a man-eater. Huh, I always wondered why she had that title. But I think they used the same AI script from the Man-Eaters and Demon Souls. Looks about right. You know, I think I fought Quelaag too many times under much less favorable circumstances than this, because I was quite literally shocked by my damage output. Which is ironic because I wasn't using any goldpine resin, since I wanted to preserve it for later on in the game. And I didn't even bother to attune Power Within yet. But despite all of that, this was perfectly sufficient. So all in all, I had quite an easy time with her, and she had a very tough time with me, which I know because I asked her. And she responded by saying yes, or she said, "Gurgle, gurgle, sister, I'm dying. What did we do to deserve such a cruel fate for a sin not committed by us?" Or something along those lines, I don't know, I didn't pay attention because I was about to murder her grieving brother, so I could wear the clothes of yet another deceased sister. You know, let's just say that the hero of this story is like chaotic neutral. But regardless, for Ceaseless I don't require any upgrades or buffs. In fact, I don't even have to meet the stat requirements. Meaning literally any weapon could do the trick. Well, unless it's something that inflicts pure fire damage, since he's completely immune to that. So all I need is 5 hits from an oversized nail clipper to provide him with a manicure that's to die for. Although I'm not sure you can truly say that I don't have the skills to wield this thing, because those are some pretty sick flips, if I can say so myself. Oh, and a little mental note, don't forget to murder the rest of the family later on. However, before going into Sans Fortress for another sick flip, and a sort of murder, since it kinda depends on how life is defined in this game. However, before I could deal with the stray demon, I once again encountered a stray Oscar.
Hello there.
Now, the reason this happened again, but rarely happened before, is because, as we learned from the one-shot video, unique enemies do not reset position or aggro when sitting at a bonfire. And the reason he can reach you at all is because you have opened up the shortcut before, which you don't usually tend to do that often. Now, what you do tend to do often is to upgrade to at least +10 before taking on the stray demon. However, if you're using a bleed weapon, even a not all that efficient one like the Morningstar, you can drain his health very quickly, even at +0. 3 hits or so will cause a bleed proc, and its resistance to bleed does not increase after each proc, like over a decade later in Elden Ring. It's especially beneficial to safely get hits in on the tip of his tail, which for whatever reason contains the same amount of blood as his ginormous ass does. Now, other than the soul arrows from before, even on SL1 we do have a few ranged options. Sure, none of the handbows can be wielded, but the light crossbow can. In fact, even the heavy version can be wielded if you two-hand it. But, that's for later, we'll cross that bow when we get to it. But the thing is that this thing is the perfect weapon for the Moonlight Butterfly, since it allows you to get hits in while it's hovering in the air. Well, that's not entirely true, at least not safely, because the reloading animation leaves you quite vulnerable, especially to the fast-paced post-pooper projectiles. And for whatever inexplicable reason, your own projectiles tend to miss when the butterfly is in actual melee range. Which really doesn't make any sense. But of course the same cannot be said about the fortress that we now have access to. Which means that not only did I now have access to an unlimited supply of large titanite shards from the vendor, and on a side note also black firebombs for later, but here I could also obtain some titanite chunks for whenever I would need that little extra kick for when you really have to bust someone's balls. However, none of those stones are even required for the massive chunk of iron known as the Iron Golem, since it's possible to knock him over the edge with the power of gold pine resin alone, meaning I can use the seemingly useless straight sword hilt for this. Now, to be fair, although I have done this before, without power within, the thing is that you only barely have enough damage to knock him over the edge after he starts wobbling. So sure, you could run in and immediately go balls deep, or better said, straight down to the hilt, but it might be a safer idea to give yourself a little bit of a margin of error instead. So, by using power within and being strong-willed, after you make him tilt, he is killed by the hilt and your task is fulfilled. Yeah, this video doesn't contain an intro song, since that would spoil the run too much, but I'm not confident this really compensated for its absence. But not to worry, if you're on the mood to go clubbing, there's a much better alternative down here in Anolondo, namely the Occult Club. The #1 pick for all great men of our culture. Pre-upgraded and essentially the equivalent of a +10 weapon. Which we can even upgrade further with the white titanite chunks that we've picked up before in the Great Hollow. On top of that, at the Giant Blacksmith we have access to an unlimited amount of twinkling titanite. Now, occult damage is kind of weird, as it's a modifier that is only applicable to a handful of enemies in the entire game, but Ornstein is one of them. So, let's see how much damage this little stick can inflict. Let's say that the results of the first test were inconclusive. Alright, that's actually quite unimpressive. Why exactly does this damage type exist in the first place? I mean, it may be occult, but it's definitely not OP. Now, fortunately we can make anything OP with the power of the Red Tearstone Ring. So let's see how much damage we can do with... Okay, once again the first test results were inconclusive. Alright then, that's what I'm talking about. Under these circumstances that can in fact be considered OP. So now whenever we hit with our thick hard piece of wood, Ornstein knows what it's like to get slapped in the face by massive OPness. And just to play things safe, For Smo, I heal back to full health and use power within instead. Less damage output, but Smo by himself is easy to deal with, especially when you bait his jump attack by running towards him. However, it was still a good thing that I decided to get out of RTSR range, because things got a little too close for comfort near the end of the fight. Alright, so I managed to execute the Executioner, although if it had been a Divine Club instead, I could have said that I smote him. Then again, I also used the Occult Club back in this old video, which was arguably the first video of the modern press continue presentation style. Ah, yes, great memories. And speaking of great memories, in order to get into the dark version of Anolondo... Wait, what? Huh. Well guys, that goes to show how hard it can be to hit on a lady. It can take a lot of balls. Speaking of which, although I already used the regular firebombs on the gargoyles, the more powerful black variety still remains. And fortunately, Gwendolyn has a rather low health pool, low fire defenses, and an easy moveset to deal with... That felt a little bit unnecessary, but there was in fact an issue here that made this fight at least harder than you would expect. Other than me just running into an attack. As I mentioned before, in the one-shot video, I suspected that lock-on range is decreased when you fight Gwendolyn in the dark version of Anolondo. And that was even more apparent when using firebombs. Now fortunately free aiming is still somewhat effective because of Gwendolyn's lingering hitbox after he teleports. And although we needed to get rid of one amazing chest to even get to this fight, but afterwards we get 3 amazing chests in return. Well, Sunlight Blade is not usable of course, and the armor is way too heavy, so I doubt I will be wearing it later on. But there is one more chest remaining and huh?
You get nothing! Good day, sir!
Yeah, I'm actually not quite sure why that's even in the game to begin with. Maybe they just forgot to put something in it? Well, to be fair, I sometimes even forget that not only Gwendolyn exists, but that there's a whole side area with yet another optional boss.
Nom 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 nom.
You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!
Regardless, I quickly made my way towards Priscilla by utilizing the dragon skip. I'm walking in the air. Okay, but not for very long. Yeah, a little too late for Christmas anyway, but it's still a winter wonderland. With inhabitants that aren't so kind as Priscilla claims them to be. But fortunately, Priscilla herself is submissive and crossbreedable. Yeah, I actually shouldn't talk like that. I should have brought my best manners. But instead, I brought my best manure.
I mentioned how I liked horse manure.
You did?
Yeah.
You said you liked horse manure.
Yeah. You know about how when you break it down, it's really a very positive thing. You know, you have a Noah with a ma in front of it. Ma-Noah. It's not bad.
And it was around this point that she mentioned the boyfriend.
Yeah.
Because then you can just sit back and harvest the rewards by letting nature take its course. Now, when placing the Lord Vessel through Framd, I realized that if I had done it through Kav instead, I would have had easy access to the Dark Hand, a weapon without stat requirements. And yes, it can be farmed from the Dark Raves instead, but with how low the drop rate is, I hoped I would be able to complete the game without it. So let's hope that this decision doesn't come back to bite us in the hand later on. But before I went to acquire the Lord Souls, I did in fact choose to farm for another weapon down in New Londo, to take down the Gaping Dragon first. And no, not the Banshee's Ghost Blade, with the same horrible drop rate, but the Jagged Ghost Blade, with a more manageable drop rate. And which is arguably the most effective bleed weapon that can be wielded at SL1. Unfortunately, being at level 1 without any poise is not very effective when trying to acquire it. So it turned out that the armor from the Darkmoon Tomb came in handy after all. Unless they do a freaking grab attack that negates poise altogether. But hey, at least Gaping Dragon should be a quick and easy fight. And well, it would have been. But that's not what happened. It did in fact drag on for quite a while, given that I completely forgot to take out the damn Channeler first. Which not only meant dealing with a constant barrage of soul arrows, which could stagger me not only out of my attacks, but could prevent me from dodging the boss's attacks as well. And on top of that, the channeler also buffs the boss, just like the hollows and the undead church towards the gargoyles. Yeah, you know what? Now it's personal. Meaning I'm not even going back to kill him first. Now I will go and defeat the boss with the goddamn channeler present. Because now it's a matter of pride. And yeah, you might say, isn't that kind of a bad decision? And wouldn't that lead to an unnecessarily frustrating fight against what would normally be a rather easy boss? Yeah. But unless you are new to the channel, can you really say that you are surprised? Like, at all? However, there is something that is going to surprise you. And certainly surprise me. I mean, this is going to make your skull explode. In fact, they will have to wheel you out of here when you see this. I actually died against Pinwheel, using the heavy crossbow. Poetic, since that is one heavy cross to bow. Or bear, either or. In fact, I even thought about using RTSR. But given the drop you'll have to make, yeah, I'm not even going to risk that. So, under the right circumstances, even a boss fight of the lowest tier can in fact become RNG heavy with such a low life bar. And because of the clones, it's like playing Pinwheel of Fortune in this shooting gallery of life and death, trying to locate and eliminate the King Pinwheel of Illusions. After all, the true King of the Dead is up next, which is why I acquired the mace. And you would think he would turn over in his grave after such a shameful display, but as hard as it might be to believe, the fight against Nido took way less effort than against Pinwheel. Even though my Divine Mace was only upgraded to +5. Given that the large Divine Ember is a bit of a hassle to acquire. Or I was being lazy, either or. However, it turned out to be more than sufficient anyway. Because as long as you can deal with the Tibia triplets, and make sure that you stay away from the big boned brothers in the back, Nido himself offers very little resistance. He doesn't exactly have a very extensive moveset. It's mainly a matter of moving away from his miasma attacks that he tends to spam constantly. Now, to be fair, technically I wouldn't have had to use a divine weapon to begin with, since the reason I did that was to make sure that the skeletons would stay dead. But given that they are regular enemies, the rules would allow me to use a different weapon for them than for Nido. But you know, even though that would have been in line with the rules, it kinda goes against the spirit of the run. But it didn't take long until the spirits of the dead lost the first among them. But for me, it's the first Lord Soul down, and only 3 more to go. So let's head into Isolith, and in case you were wondering, when the hell is the hand axe going to show up, since that's the starting weapon of the pyromancer? Well, using the primary weapon of the pyromancer versus the final master of the primordial fire arts is kind of fitting, I suppose. But in all fairness, it doesn't really matter that much what weapon you use against this boss. But something that might benefit you is the crash shield in case you get stuck and can't avoid the magic wave in time. Because then you can simply turn around and block nearly all of the incoming damage instead. Didn't turn out to be necessary though, because for most of the fight, the sage just butt slammed in one place. So yeah, I get the demon part of the name, and although he is neither fire resistant nor inflicts any fire damage, visually he's on fire at least, but for a sage he doesn't exactly exhibit a meaningful amount of intelligence. Well, unfortunately, I didn't exhibit a lot of intelligence either, choosing to save the cestus for the fight against the centipede demon. Because back in the day when I did the SO1 Nukem Plus 7 cestus run, for whatever reason, I didn't actually include the centipede demon. Oh, by the way, it might actually be that this weapon is called Kestis and not Cestus, depending on the pronunciation of the letter C based on the origin of the word. But in all fairness, the only letter that truly matters is the material that this weapon is made of. Unfortunately, the centipede demon is actually made out of flaming bullshit, because normally you don't even really notice how poor the hitboxes are and how screwed up the camera can get in this fight. I mean, we give DS2 a lot of shit, but come on. That really puts the cent in centipede, because this isn't worth a dime. Well, at least the lava is an easy way to set up the red tear stone. Son of a bitch. I lava you, lava corpse woman. So yeah, I guess I should be glad that I skipped this fight in the Cestus run, because doing it now took way more attempts than necessary. In fact, it was so shitty that I think I will start a petition to turn the name Centipede into Centipooped. But hey, fortunately the next boss is a lot better. Oh, wait. Well, it's a bat, not better. Regardless, given that anything other than pure fire damage would be sufficient against the Bat of Chaos, I chose to use my final damage inflicting consumable, which is the poison knife. However, something much more toxic than these venomous little fork companions isn't merely the overall design of the Bat of Chaos, but specifically the fact that it can cast Firestorm on your way towards the Chaos Bug, when there's practically no space to avoid it. Chaos? Yeah, you bet your ass. In fact, I only barely happened to survive, with about as much HP remaining as the poison knives can inflict in damage. But of course, for this not quite a boss fight, it's more than alright. However, what is anything but alright is the fact that one of the weapons that we can wield at SR1 is one wielded by the one upgrading our other ones. So I made sure that Andre had in fact performed every service I required of him before smiting our beloved smith.
My left foot, always been better than the right one.
Now this does entail that I can't get him to post-mortemly upgrade his own weapon obviously, but hey, come on, vamos. And before you can even say a la playa, he will have it transformed into a fire weapon. Only +5 unfortunately, because I'm saving the red titanite chunks for later, and I don't exactly feel like farming for them. But not to worry though, Sif is next, and despite being a dragon, he is as weak to fire as he is to lightning. And although the giant blacksmith hammer inflicts a lot more damage than Andre's, I must say that I was actually pleasantly surprised by how well another smithing hammer performed at SR1. Could have been even better of course by being in RTSR range, but against Sif I actually prefer to not do that, given that you can easily get clipped on the edges of his crystal breath, since that it can be really hard to tell where exactly the edge of the hitbox is supposed to be. So although he has the advantage of taking less damage, using Power Within instead tips the scale less in Sif's favor than the instant death of RTSR would. Moreover, by using my, by now familiar to any regular viewers, looping strategy, moving back and forth to bait and avoid his crystal breath attacks, it would only take a little bit of patience to take him down. By the way, speaking of crystals, I almost forgot to pick up the Crystal Ember, something you would normally overlook completely, since crystal weapons cannot be repaired. But in this one, that's obviously not a concern. However, for the next fight, I'm using a very different crystal weapon, one in name only. After all, I could use a shield as a weapon for a single fight, per the rules, and the one I chose was the Crystal Ring Shield, which has a unique ability that makes it function as an actual weapon. There are only two downsides. The lock-on can make it anything but crystal clear what direction the projectile will go into, so I pretty much resorted to free aiming, or locking on at the last moment to change the direction right before the projectile goes off. Or of course you can just boop Sif on the snoot with a shield bash. But the second issue is that it loses durability each time you use the weapon art. Now fortunately, given that it's a crystal weapon in name only, you can in fact repair it with repair powder. However, it turned out that I only got the weapon at risk message at the very end of the fight anyway. Yeah, it's a peculiar piece of equipment. What even is this shield? Anyway, with the 4 kings remaining, I had reasons to save them until after the DLC. However, that implied that another blacksmith had to go. Although I made sure that he had performed all the necessary services before performing the bone-chilling act of acquiring his fiery hammer. Because given that the Sanctuary Guardian is the weakest boss remaining, in fact he has less HP than Quelaag, believe it or not, and Vamus's hammer is the weakest blacksmith hammer of the 3, I suppose that Rickard just magics his magic weapons into existence. But the thing is that Vamus' hammer proved more than sufficient against the Sanctuary Guardian. And on top of that, it inflicts a lot of poise damage as well, allowing for an additional free hit, or if you predict it correctly, an attack opportunity that would normally result in a follow-up attack from the boss. By the way, it's very strange how the Sanctuary Guardian is the only boss in the entire game, and almost in the entire franchise, that drops a soul that cannot be turned into anything else. It only gives you more souls. Which in this case is a good thing, because I had finally fully upgraded my pyro flame, because given how quickly I managed to one-shot Artorias with it in the one-shot contest video, I decided to save my single use of a pyromancy spell for Artorias. However, even though I managed to hit him without dying in the process, Artorias avoided that same fate as well. So my initial reaction was, oh damn, now I'll have to die and try again. But then it occurred to me that it's irrelevant whether or not it's a one-shot this time, given that Fire Tempest can be used more than once. Yeah, the numbers are very peculiar. After all, in this run, the amount of hits don't matter, as long as it's the same spell, of course, per the rules. And speaking of the one-shot contest, other than that I suspect that Lamin's video will probably drop in 2030 or something, but the reason I chose to use a chaos-infused pickaxe against Manus was because in the 12-hour chaos of siphoning out my humanity, trying to get to the one-shot on him, I most certainly have an axe to pick with him. And wow, I am incredibly surprised as to how well this weapon picked apart his health bar. I mean, sure, it's not as effective as the giant blacksmith hammer, because I really like how the R2 attacks of that weapon can quickly close the distance. So this time I had to pick my attack opportunities a bit more carefully, if I still wanted to safely get R2 attacks in. But despite the fact that lightning damage might burn through his HP a little better, the fire damage of the Chaos Infusion still depleted it lightning fast. Wait, did I phrase that correctly? Okay, that description wasn't exactly crystal clear, but speaking of a lightning infused hammer, now we're near the end of the game, we finally get to the two main go-to SO1 weapons. But instead of going for a lightning infusion for the reinforced club, given that Black Dragon Calamite has no actual weakness but his lowest defenses are strike and lightning, and on top of that he can actually bleed, although it's unlikely that you'll actually get a proc with this weapon. However, given that we only need to use our weapon for a single fight, Crystal Infusion with Goldmine Resin is much more effective than a Lightning Infusion. In fact, with RTSR active, you can make Calamity's End in only a few hits, even at SL1, and even without actually getting the bleed proc. So in principle it's a great choice for a regular SL1 run as well, but of course only if you can manage to finish the game before breaking your weapon. And speaking of finishing the game, now we no longer require the services of the final blacksmith. Well, almost the final one, you know, Rickard, so easily forgotten. But in the end we had to say nighty-night with teary eyes under starry skies. But hey, fuck it, now we finally have our main go-to SL1 weapon, the giant blacksmith hammer. Which, believe it or not, is in fact not called the giant blacksmith hammer at all. It's the blacksmith giant hammer. What the frick? Okay, now that's some Mandela effect type shit. But regardless, I made sure to save this weapon for the 4 Kings DPS race, because this weapon has a giant D per ass. In fact, it allows you to finish the fight in 3 Kings, and lets you finish a single King quickly enough that even when the homing magic is out, you will actually have enough time and freedom of movement to avoid it until it dissipates. And this means that only Gwyn remains. And my thought was to save the dagger for him specifically, given its high critical modifier. And using the same principle as with Calamite, I went for Crystal Infusion rather than Chaos. However, as it turns out, this wasn't optimal at all, as his fire resistance is his lowest resistance, and Charcoal Pine Resin only adds a little bit of extra damage. So I suspect that Chaos would probably have been much more efficient. But hey, to be fair, it all comes down to chaining parries together anyway. So as long as you can do that consistently, your damage output isn't even all that relevant to begin with. So that's it. Dark Souls 1, SL1, all bosses using a different weapon for each boss fight. In fact, we still had a few options left. The regular Broken Sword, the regular Ghost Blade that drops from the Banshees, the Dark Hand, the Dragon Head Stone, and even the Skull Lantern, if you're desperate enough. Or you could even have included Catalyst melee attacks, and although I did have a rule against using multiple weapons that you don't have the stats for, if you don't limit yourself to one, you can also take advantage of split damage that isn't penalized when not meeting stat requirements, which was the basis of this entire video. I'm not saying that any of those would have been really effective per se, but at least usable to some extent. So, in conclusion, even without the presence of any stat boosting gear, Soul Level 1 runs, even in the first Dark Souls game, allow for a lot of variation. So, well, I'm not sure what you want to do with that information, but hey, at least I got a video out of it, so, well, that's nice. Oh.